the last, I wanted to talk just a little bit about what, I asked the mayor if it was okay for me to come here, and apparently commissioners are allowed to have their own opinions and speak however they want about human rights and still be commissioners. I'm going to talk about what the Human Rights Commission is doing, and then I'm going to talk about what I think we should be doing. The Human Rights Commission for the City of Salt Lake, which is a really important part of Mayor Becker's program, and I think part of the platform on which he was elected, is trying to address specifically the Stone Age state that Salt Lake is in the state of Utah with respect to rights regarding sexual orientation. It's amazing to me that it is legal to fire someone in the state of Utah because they are gay or lesbian, bisexual. It's legal to not rent to someone or a victim on that basis. I lived half my life in New York and the other half in California. I've been here for a year and a half. My head is still spinning. In fact, the Utah Anti-Discrimination and Labor Division, who's responsible for enforcing anti-discrimination policies statewide, get calls regularly about people who have been discriminated against, who have been fired or evicted or not rented to based on sexual orientation, and they have to say, well, actually, sorry, there's no protection for you. People are allowed to discriminate against you in that way. And so the Human Rights Commission's two priorities are trying to get an ordinance that will prevent discrimination based on sexual orientation for the City of Salt Lake, and also a hate crimes ordinance, because the state of Utah does not have hate crimes legislation, which is also pretty amazing. There's going to be a big push for this in the summer. There's going to be a lot of resistance about whether Salt Lake City can have its own legal regime separate from the rest of the state. So that's one of the biggest things on the agenda. The other issue is since the passage of SB 81, which is this pretty terrifying anti-immigrant legislation. It requires landlords and employers to verify immigration status, which will practically, what will happen is it will increase discrimination based on race and national origin. One of the biggest in the statistics that the state of Utah keeps about who's discriminated against in housing, a lot of it is based on, like they hear an accent, Latino accent, and the landlord won't rent to them. And now the state can do something about that because it's illegal. You just can't. But with the passage of SB 81, it's going to allow landlords to have the excuse of saying, well, that person has an accent and they could be undocumented, and that means that I could be in trouble for renting to them. And those concerns were raised to the legislature, and they were not addressed. So the City of Salt Lake is concerned about what to do about this problem, and they see that it will also be kind of a flood once the law is in effect. Now, speaking not as a commissioner, what I think needs to be done is that Salt Lake City needs to be an amnesty city, which means that nobody has to participate in the persecution of undocumented people. San Francisco is an amnesty city. And what that meant was when ICE raids happened, the police and did not participate. What's scary about SB 81, from the perspective of a legal historian, is it's requiring everyday citizens to participate in this campaign of persecution. It reminds me of the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850, in fact, which was required if anyone could become forced to be part of a posse to chase down a fugitive slave, alleged fugitive slave in a non-slave state. And that was really resisted strongly by African Americans in non-slave states. They formed vigilance committees where they would protect their neighborhoods from the so-called slave catchers. Part of the Fugitive Slave Act also set up a situation where the slave catcher would bring the alleged slave before a judge, and the judge would be paid $10 if they found that he was a slave or she was a slave. It would be paid only $5 if you found that he or she was not a slave. And the person who was the alleged slave was not allowed to testify or present any evidence. When I see laws like SB 81, I think this is a very sort of scary echo from the past. And I think that we all morally have an obligation to not participate. It should never have been passed. Now that it has been passed, we need to pressure the city to try not, to do what it can to not participate in this. And in anticipating this, there's actually language in the law that says that prohibits a unit of local government from enacting an ordinance or policy that limits or prohibits a law enforcement officer or government employee from communicating or cooperating with federal officials regarding the immigration status of a person within that state. So SB 81 anticipates this and makes it impossible for there to be the city to pass amnesty-type legislation. But I think that's something that, the same thing happened in 1850. The states were preempted from doing anything, but people fought against it, and it was not really enforceable. So I guess that's all I came here to say. If people have any questions about any of the organizations that I talked about, you can see me. I'll be here afterwards. And thank you for inviting me.